What's up? It's your girl Onyx Isis. I'm coming to you today with another book review, and today I'll be reviewing the narrative of Sojourner Truth, which is actually a short book, around 74 pages. As always, I come to you through the perspective of an African internationalist. I am an African internationalist, and African internationalism is a socialist theory developed by the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I'm a Yeshitelaist. I am a leading member of the African People's Socialist Party. I am the president of the African National Women's Organization, which is a mass organization of the party. And African internationalism not only allows us to theorize around the question of African people and to come to conclusions about African people, but it also pushes us to do things in practice, meaning that we have to show that we are about contributing to the overthrow of parasitic capitalism and bringing forth the revolutionary leadership of the African poor and working class. And so everything that I do and review comes through the perspectives that centers African people through the lens of African internationalism, and that's the lens under which I'm reviewing this book today, the narrative of Sojourner Truth. So the reason why I chose this book today, I've read it a while ago, but the reason why I chose it today is because first I wanted to highlight an African woman. Two, I thought that Sojourner Truth has been mischaracterized on so many occasions as the first black feminist or a black women's rights person. But the reality of this, her own words, show that she was a fighter for black people. She was a lover of freedom and someone who did not believe in the enslavement of African people and wanted to do whatever she could to challenge that. Sojourner Truth is an African woman who was born in the United States. She was born in the northern, she was born in New York, and her first language was Dutch. It was not English. So anything that you've seen around Sojourner Truth and her having some sort of southern twang was not an accurate depiction of her. As a matter of fact, it was a propaganda piece. Her famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman," was a propaganda piece to kind of highlight the brutalities of enslavement of African people by labeling it as something that was a southern issue, when in fact slavery was alive and well in the northern states of the United States, which socially and historically has been seen as a kinder, gentler enslavement. But what we're seeing in this book is that the enslavement of African people in the North was not kind, was not gentle, particularly for African women. And I think that when people mischaracterize her as let's first talk about the speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" Which is not even highlighted in this book. But the speech, "Ain't I a Woman," is Sojourner says, "Ain't I a woman? I do just as much work as a man. I work harder and stronger. I do all of this stuff, but yet I'm treated like I'm nothing. I don't have horse-drawn carriages. I don't have the same niceties as white women. I don't have coats thrown over puddles, and I'm not handled like a lady." And she was saying this in front of a convention of white women who had gathered there to hear the great Sojourner Truth speak, and possibly other black women who were enslaved, because the women's movement at the time was very much tied to the abolition movement and the voting rights movement for white women. And so very often you'll see characters like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman be used to promote the anti-abolitionist movement, but also tie that into what demands that the white women had at the time. And so they would often draw in African women to their conventions and conferences to speak, etc. So "Ain't I a Woman" has been identified as one of the early feminist thought pieces, and it really isn't. It really is an indictment of white women. It's an indictment of slavery. It's an indictment of African subjugation to white people, and I don't think that Sojourner planned to do that. I thought that because she's not the character Sojourner Truth, the person that we have come to understand, or I have come to understand, was really appreciative of her relationship with white people. She acknowledged, how there are good white people and not good white people, and even in this book come to those same conclusions. So I don't think that she meant to go in front of an audience of white women and indict them, but that's exactly what her speech does. It indicts white women and indicts the entire system of oppression that kept her subjugated. And also in her book, she doesn't mean to indict white women, but it does in other ways by showing the violence and pettiness of white women slaveholders. It shows how they disregarded the family unit of African people, like all enslavers did at the time, and how they were vengeful and petty and caused more violence on African people. Sojourner Truth was a phenomenal woman because during the time that she had fought for her freedom and gained her freedom, she also fought for the freedom of her son, who was illegally sold down south to a harsher slave environment, and won and got him back. She fought for the voices of black people during times where, she wasn't, Rosa Parks wasn't the first black woman to sit in the white section. Sojourner actually did way back when, and demand that she gets the rights to sit wherever the hell she wants, and fought and sued. She was a suing ass sister. She sued, and in some cases she won. I mean, she was just really phenomenal for that time. She was like a badass, and it was really incredible to learn, that the basis for all these things of why she was being a badass was because it required that sort of audacity during the time when enslavement of African people was the norm in the North and the South and everywhere, and where people were breaking down the structures that had held the capitalist glue of this economy together. And black women, black men were often used as tools, as I've seen here, and in other narratives, often used as tools by white people. There was the pro-slavery and there's the anti-slavery, but the anti-slavery folks were the most exploitative. I mean, they were just as exploitative as the folks who had enslaved African people. I thought, particularly because the speech "Ain't I a Woman" was documented in Southern slang, and Sister Sojourner Truth ain't never been to the South as an enslaved person, and she didn't know Southern slang because her first language was Dutch, and so she very much had a Northern accent. But that was a propaganda piece that was used at the time to challenge slavery at that point. Sojourner was eventually became an evangelist, a Christian evangelist, and chose to take her fight to the spiritual realm using Christianity. She was very much grown up in the Northern Christian faith, whatever that faith is. I don't know, there's like different kinds. And she, toward the end of the book, found her calling to be an evangelist. And what I thought also was important to identify is that even though she didn't focus so much on it, the breakdown of tearing apart of her family, the watching her parents die in the basement, hardly from ailments and not being fed, and all of these things, from not knowing what happened to her son once he became a merchant seaman and she never heard from him again. Not understanding or knowing where her family was, her sisters, her brothers, and she had a big family. And so you see the despair, the sadness that came along with slavery in the North and the enslavement of our people. And so I think it was a really great documented piece to kind of, in looking at the lens of Sojourner Truth's life, you see the periphery of what damage this has caused, not only to her back then, but what damage it has caused to African people now. Because I think that we should not ever look at this situation as this is some bubble, but that it was a broader picture of the lives of African people during that time. And Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman were colleagues, and they were in the same circles. And I thought it was really important to highlight their connection, because I wrote a piece called Dialectical Materialism versus Philosophical Idealism, which hones in on their relationship and why one was different from the other. But it's also important to know that, she was around during the time of Frederick Douglass, and all of these Africans were in these circles of white people navigating this construct of of abolition and voting and all of these things that were happening, particularly in the North, that allowed for African women to have a voice, but also exploited African women like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. So, as an African woman activist, African woman revolutionary, I thought it was really important to highlight Sojourner Truth's life, and I will probably do another book that will be centered around African women in our struggle. So I appreciate you taking the time to look at this video, and I'll see you soon.